Hey everybody, today I would like to go over something a little bit outside of the box and talk about joint flexibility and joint mobility and stretching. Something that goes in conjunction with the dynamic and the PNF and everything else, the self-myofascial work. But I really want to go over this because I think it's something that's very important. It's something that truly helped me in my career when I was training. I had a couple different coaches introduced me to it about 10 to 15 years ago, and it's just now starting to really gain some traction in research. And when we're talking about dynamic jumping, and we're talking about lifting and running and sprint mechanics and everything else, the joint mobility part of it has become a very big aspect. And a lot of times we're talking about, and I'm sure some of you that are familiar with the physical therapy side of things, when we start talking about movement pattern recognition, a lot of times that joint health and the joint range of motion becomes a very big issue of how are the muscles firing. Well, a lot of times they're not firing at full capacity because of the immobility of the movement patterns of the joints. So that's something that I like to truly encourage prior to working out, going to practice. Even if you have time during practice, if you start feeling some things tighten up, those are some key ideas that you can use as a way to get back into it, get those neuroreceptors firing and all those kind of things. So as an athlete shows up, we obviously like to, and I'm going to talk about kind of the pre-workout aspect of this, but it can be used throughout the day, it can be used at night. I really do recommend that when people are going into their static stretching when they're at night and they're just working on all those kind of things, to still continue to work on that mobility of the joints so that the brain is understanding, well, why does my hamstring need to be a little bit looser? Well, let's start off working the ankle and then we go into the hamstring. So those are all things that we could probably all have hours long discussion on all these things. So for this purpose, I'll try to keep it short, and I am going to be talking about joint mobility and joint flexibility. So to kind of dive into what we've been talking about with self-myofascial work and everything else, we typically like to tell our athletes to get here a little bit before the workout is going to start. And this is just giving you a rundown. Then they go into that. They go into their self-massage or their foam rolling or just kind of working the muscles out with some of the other tools that we have here. If you have some of the compression boots like we have, like the Rapid Reboot, which is what we have, or the Normatec, typically trying to get the athlete into that frame of mind prior to the workout starting. So, 10 minutes or so before the workout starts, you need to do some self-care. When the workout starts, what we like to do is we will always start with that joint mobility. From the joint mobility, we go through a little vision training deal to just set those things up, whether we're talking about peripherals, we're talking about tracking, we're talking about the vestibular system. And then we go into the dynamic warm up, and then the warm up that's really specific to the workout that we're going to do. That all takes roughly 10 to 12 minutes prior to our workout. But more importantly for this video, the joint mobility. And the reason I brought all of that up is because I believe that there is a pattern and a system that should be followed for the system to actually work properly, to get the most out of it and be the most efficient for your workout, for your practice, for your daily routines. And so that's why I was bringing that up. But again, if going back to it, we always start with the joint mobility first. So I'm going to go through a quick routine of just a couple. We have about 5 different things that we'll do per joint system, but we start from the ground and work our way up. And then again, we go into the dynamic. So I'm going to give a few different things that we do. One thing I like to recommend for most people, unless they're wearing super flexible shoes like this, that they take their shoes off so that their feet can feel the ground and that their ankles and their feet can move into full ranges of motion. They're not wearing a super thick foam shoe that won't allow them to do those things. We like to go through that whole system prior to doing anything else to prime those joints, prime everything for movement prior to moving. So it's just like the old adage of people used to just go on 2-mile runs before they do a sprint workout. And one thing I learned in college and then into my professional career was never, ever, ever, ever go into a full speed mechanic prior to building up to full speed. So that old adage of just going out on a run was never setting me up mechanically to be ready for not just the overall position of the sprinting, but the force absorption and production of sprinting didn't happen in my warm-up jog. So going through joint mobility, going through the dynamics, and then going through a full-on build-up from 65 to 75 to 90 prior to ever stepping onto the track to try to run fast was a really important aspect. And again, going back to it, it all started with this and making sure that our joint movement, our joint flexibility was on par, and it does take practice. So my one thing that I would like that I have talked about, but I wanted to reiterate is the importance of joint flexibility and joint mobility.